He always had a girlfriend, so women, so that was a little bit, get my feathers ruffled.
When Malcolm-Jamal Warner passed, tributes flooded in from fans and celebrities across the world. But nothing compared to the words of his ex, Karen Molina White. After decades of silence, she broke her silence with a message so raw, so unexpected, that it instantly divided millions. Some called it heartfelt. Others said it crossed the line. But one thing is certain. Her confession changed the way the world remembered him. It all began on what seemed like an ordinary day.
Life, it's fragile, and in the blink of an eye,
you never know.
You never know. So speaking of legacy, what do you hope that your legacy is going to be?
There is part of me that I will be able to leave this earth, knowing and people knowing that I was a good person.
I spent, so much of the early part of my life listening to, being celebrated on one hand, but paying way too much attention to the naysay.
Malcolm-Jamal Warner, the man millions still remembered as Theo Huxtable, was out swimming with a close friend. The two had spent the afternoon laughing, joking, and enjoying the water. By all appearances, it was nothing more than a calm, carefree moment. But within hours, that calm turned into a nightmare. The friend surfaced alive. Malcolm didn't. News of his sudden passing spread like wildfire, leaving fans stunned. How could someone who looked so healthy, so full of energy, be gone in an instant? More unsettling was the reaction of the person closest to him, his mother. Instead of offering clarity, she only deepened mystery with a cryptic statement, "I can't say yet." Those 4 words spread across the internet like gasoline on fire. People weren't just grieving, they were speculating. And that speculation only grew when fans realized just how surreal the timing was. Only days before, Malcolm had been spotted at a concert, smiling wide, chatting with friends, and looking every bit the picture of health. He looked happy. He looked alive. One fan commented under a viral clip. Another wrote, "It doesn't make sense. How can someone be so full of life one night and gone the next?" The contradiction was chilling. On the surface, Malcolm's life appeared steady and even joyful. Yet behind the scenes, something had gone terribly wrong. The unanswered questions began piling up. Was this an accident? Was there more to the story? Or was it simply one of those cruel, unpredictable twists of fate? But the shock of his death was only the beginning. Because just as the world was trying to process the loss, a single voice stepped forward to change everything. The voice of his ex-girlfriend. And what she revealed would ignite a storm unlike anything fans had ever seen. When the news first broke, the world wanted answers. But instead of clarity, Malcolm's own mother left everyone in suspense. Standing before cameras, her voice steady but heavy, she said only, "I can't say yet." That was it. For words. For words that sent fans, tabloids, and even fellow actors spiraling into endless theories. Was she hiding something? Protecting her son's privacy? Or was the truth simply too painful to reveal in that moment? The vagueness only fueled the storm. Online forums lit up overnight. One user wrote, "If even his mother can't explain it, then what really happened?" Another bluntly asked, "What aren't they telling us?" But while speculation spread like wildfire, grief spread even faster. Fans who had grown up watching Malcolm on the Cosby Show posted old clips, remembering the way he made them laugh as Theo Huxtable. Others shared stories of meeting him in real life, how he always took time to shake a hand, sign an autograph, or crack a joke to ease the moment. Even co-stars were shaken. Phylicia Rashad, who played his mother on screen, wrote, "Malcolm was not just a colleague. He was family. His talent, kindness, and warm heart will live on." Those words carried weight. For many, Phylicia's tribute reminded the world that Malcolm's impact was more than just television. It was personal. It was generational. And yet, while tributes from colleagues and fans poured in, the mystery surrounding his final day only made the loss harder to accept. People struggled to reconcile the vibrant Malcolm they had just seen, laughing and performing, with the man suddenly gone. "It doesn't add up," one longtime fan tweeted, echoing what thousands were thinking. But just when grief seemed to be the only story, something else pushed its way into the spotlight. It wasn't an official statement. It wasn't a press release. It came from someone who knew Malcolm more intimately than most. An ex-girlfriend who had stayed silent for decades suddenly chose this moment to speak. And what she revealed would leave millions questioning not just the man, but the love story they thought they knew. And then came the moment no one expected. After decades of silence, Karen Molina White, Malcolm's ex from the 1990s, spoke out. At 60 years old, with a steady voice and unshakable gaze, she chose this moment to tell the world exactly what he had meant to her. She didn't hide behind vague platitudes. She didn't downplay their history. Instead, she spoke with startling honesty. Their bond, she said, was a karmic relationship. A fateful arrangement that taught them lessons about love, letting go, and even growing after heartbreak. For Karen, this wasn't about gossip or headlines. It wasn't about reigniting an old flame in the public eye. It was about saying what her heart needed to say before it was too late. In one simple but piercing statement, she told the world that the thread connecting her to Malcolm never truly broke, not even after their romance ended. The timing made it even more powerful. After all, she could have stayed silent. She could have left the tributes to fans and colleagues. But instead, she risked criticism by stepping into the conversation and declaring her truth. As she put it, sometimes the most important thing is to say what your heart needs to say, because we never know what tomorrow will bring. That single line hit like a lightning bolt. Within hours, the internet split in two. Some called it beautiful. Fans tweeted, "This is what love looks like, even after years apart." Others accused her of stealing the spotlight. One critic wrote bluntly, "Why speak now after decades of silence?" But regardless of which side you fell on, no one could deny it. Karen's words changed the tone of Malcolm's farewell. It was no longer just about a beloved actor's passing. It was now also about a love story, unfinished and unresolved, that had come back to life at the very end. And that revelation didn't just stir emotions. It sparked something bigger. A storm of tributes, debates, and memories that swept across the globe like wildfire. Within hours of Karen's heartfelt post, the world erupted. Social media didn't just react, it exploded. Hashtags like hashtag Malcolm-Jamal Warner and hashtag Theo Huxtable Forever shot to the top of trending lists worldwide. In just 24 hours, more than 500,000 posts flooded platforms, with fans sharing photos, rare clips, and personal memories. Old Cosby Show scenes resurfaced. Unseen behind-the-scenes videos were passed around. And suddenly, people who hadn't thought about Malcolm-Jamal Warner in years were reliving the joy he had once brought into their homes. Hollywood joined in too. Former castmates shared deeply personal stories, like the nights Malcolm would patiently sit for hours, helping fellow actors rehearse their lines, or the way he could cut through on-set tension with a perfectly timed joke. Phylicia Rashad, forever remembered as his on-screen mother, captured the mood with one line: Malcolm was not just a colleague. He was family. Younger stars weighed in as well. Donald Glover called him a lighthouse who guided the next generation through Hollywood's toughest stereotypes. Yahya Abdul-Mateen too echoed the sentiment, thanking Malcolm for being proof that breaking the mold was possible. But wasn't just Hollywood. The African-American community responded with an outpouring of love that felt different, deeper. In countless articles and tribute videos, Malcolm was celebrated as a symbol of progress. Back in the late 80s and early 90s, when television still leaned on damaging stereotypes, Malcolm had helped rewrite the narrative. Through Theo Huxtable, he gave audiences a new vision of a black family: intellectual, humane, relatable. A vision that mattered. A vision that lasted. Even international outlets revisited his journey, from the teenage Emmy nominee in 1986 to the Grammy winner in 2015, to the respected actor who left his mark on shows like Sons of Anarchy, The Resident, and American Crime Story. To the world, Malcolm's legacy was now unfolding in two powerful layers: the beloved sitcom son who became a cultural icon, and the artist who refused to let himself be defined by one role. And yet, as this tidal wave of remembrance surged forward, another conversation began bubbling underneath. Critics and fans alike started to ask, why is it that some artists are celebrated most loudly only after they're gone? Why had so many forgotten Malcolm in his later years, only to remember him now? That question, about memory, about legacy, about how the world treats its icons, would soon ignite a debate that went far beyond a single actor's passing. As the tributes poured in, another conversation began to take shape. A more uncomfortable one. Critics and fans started asking, why does it take death for the world to remember someone who gave us so much? Malcolm's passing put a spotlight on a phenomenon often called the frozen legacy, when an artist's name gets cemented in memory only after they're gone, even if they were largely ignored in their later years. And for many, Malcolm was the perfect example. On one hand, he was forever Theo Huxtable, the teenager who helped reshape how black families were seen on television. That role alone made him iconic. But at the same time, people realized how little they had celebrated his later work, his Grammy-winning music, his acclaimed performances on Sons of Anarchy and American Crime Story, even his spoken-word poetry. For years, much of that had flown under the radar. Some argued this was proof of cultural amnesia, that we as audiences are quick to put artists in a box, praising their early roles but forgetting the decades of work that followed. Others pushed back, saying Malcolm himself had chosen a quieter path, one that prioritized integrity over fame. He once said plainly, "I know my legacy is partly secured because of the Cosby Show, but I want to be remembered for what I did after that as well." The debate spilled everywhere, from Twitter threads to morning talk shows to late-night podcasts. Some stations even began quietly re-airing old Cosby Show episodes as tribute, careful not to promote too loudly because of the controversies around Bill Cosby. Meanwhile, longtime fan groups launched online campaigns urging streaming platforms to bring the show back, with messages like, "You can't erase an entire cultural work because of one man's mistakes." For weeks, it seemed like Malcolm's name was everywhere. But beneath the nostalgia was a bigger question. How do we decide which legacies deserve to live on? And at the center of that debate stood Malcolm himself, not just the sitcom star, but the artist who had fought to define his career on his own terms. For all the noise surrounding his passing, for the hashtags, the debates, and the headlines, those who truly knew Malcolm remembered something far more important, the kind of man he chose to be. From the beginning, he understood the weight of being Theo Huxtable. That role had opened doors, but also built walls. Malcolm could have chased sitcom fame forever, cashing in on nostalgia. But he didn't. Instead, he carved out a career on his own terms, careful, deliberate, and deeply personal. After the Cosby Show, he poured himself into music and poetry. His jazz and spoken-word albums weren't made for mass-market fame. They were made because they meant something to him. In 2015, when he won a Grammy for Best Traditional R&B Performance, it wasn't just an award. It was proof that his artistry stretched far beyond one iconic role. Colleagues often spoke about his quiet discipline. Directors remembered how he would turn down roles that didn't align with his principles, even if it meant waiting longer between projects. Castmates recalled how he carried himself with dignity, never letting the weight of his early fame twist into bitterness. As one co-star put it, Malcolm wasn't chasing the spotlight. He was chasing truth. That resilience wasn't loud, but it was steady. He wasn't just preserving his career, he was protecting his legacy. And in doing so, he became more than an actor, more than a musician, more than a cultural figure. He became an example of what it looks like to stay grounded in an industry built to pull you apart. Which brings us back to the words that sparked this global wave in the first place, Karen Molina White's final message. Her tribute wasn't just about nostalgia or even about grief, it was about the Malcolm she knew. A man whose love, kindness, and principles carried through every chapter of his life. And that's what makes his story so enduring. Not just the roles he played or the awards he won, but the way he lived, with conviction, resilience, and heart. As the tributes poured in and the hashtags trended, another uncomfortable truth began to surface, what some critics called the frozen legacy. It's the phenomenon where an artist is celebrated endlessly after death, yet quietly overlooked while still alive. And Malcolm-Jamal Warner, for all his talent and contributions, was no exception. In the years before his passing, his name wasn't always in the headlines. He worked steadily, yes, but much of the public seemed to forget just how much he had given to culture. Then, suddenly, with the news of his death, the world remembered. Clips resurfaced, fan pages reactivated, and streaming platforms quietly began re-airing The Cosby Show. Almost overnight, he went from barely mentioned to impossible to escape. But not without controversy. Some argued that re-airing the show was a form of tribute, a way to honor Malcolm and his castmates. Others saw it as reopening wounds tied to Bill Cosby scandals. For Malcolm supporters, though, this was about more than one man's mistakes. It was about reclaiming the cultural impact of a series that changed television forever, and about honoring the actor who embodied so much more than just a character. Podcasts, talk shows, and blogs revisited his career, this time framing him not just as Theo Huxtable, but as a multidimensional artist who deserved far more recognition while he was still here. Fans launched campaigns demanding networks bring back reruns, arguing you can't erase an entire cultural work because of one person's sins. And in that moment, Malcolm's life became a mirror, forcing us to question how we treat our icons. Why do we wait until someone is gone to celebrate them? Why does death unlock the appreciation that life often withholds? For Malcolm, the frozen legacy was bittersweet. He was cherished as a cultural touchstone, yet also a victim of cultural amnesia. But the wave of love after his passing proved something undeniable. His story, his art, and his impact had never truly disappeared. They were simply waiting to be remembered. And now, because of Karen's heartfelt words and the collective voices that followed, Malcolm-Jamal Warner's legacy is no longer frozen. It's alive again, stitched into the fabric of memory where it always belonged. In the end, Malcolm-Jamal Warner's story isn't just about a beloved actor who grew up on television. It's about the complicated ways we love, remember, and carry the legacies of the people who shape us. Karen Molina White's final tribute wasn't just the confession of a woman in her 60s. It was a reminder that love doesn't always vanish with time or distance. Sometimes it lingers, quietly shaping us until one final moment brings it all rushing back. Her words reopen old chapters, spark new debates, and prove that the bonds we form in life can outlast even death. The public reaction showed just how deeply Malcolm mattered. To fans, he was more than Theo Huxtable. He was a familiar face in their living rooms, a symbol of possibility, and later, an artist who chose principle over popularity. To his peers, he was family. And to the culture at large, he became a case study in how memory and legacy collide, sometimes too late, but never too little. What makes Malcolm's journey so powerful is not just the roles he played, but the life he insisted on living on his own terms. He didn't chase the easy path. He protected his art, he mentored others, and he used his platform to push back against stereotypes in an industry that often box people in. That's the kind of quiet resilience that leaves a mark long after the lights fade. And maybe that's the real lesson here, that we shouldn't wait until someone is gone to celebrate them. That legacy is not frozen in time, but built moment by moment, word by word, memory by memory. Malcolm-Jamal Warner may no longer walk this world, but the love he gave, the art he created, and the change he inspired will keep echoing for generations. His story reminds us that fame fades, headlines fade, but the way you touch people, that never does. Because in the end, love and legacy are the only things that truly last.
What I saw was fun, never anything inappropriate. What I saw was work and play at work and fun. Mrs. Cosby was a frequent visitor to the studio. She was there a lot. That's what I saw.
It's fragile, and in the blink of an eye,
You never know.
you never know. So speaking of legacy, what do you hope that your legacy is going to be?
There is part of me that I will be able to leave this earth, knowing and people knowing that I was a good person.
I spent, so much of the early part of my life listening to, being celebrated on one hand, but paying way too much attention to the naysay.
And I was kind of going through a period that I was having a struggle with hopelessness.
To the world, Malcolm-Jamal Warner was the quick-witted son we all grew up with. But to Phylicia Rashad, he was far more, her real-life son in every way that mattered. Which is why her shocking revelation after his final days hit like a thunderclap. She says she saw the signs no one else noticed, that Malcolm was fighting a silent war the cameras never caught. And what she revealed about those last moments doesn't just change how we remember him. It raises the question, what really happened to the man we thought we knew? From the outside, Malcolm-Jamal Warner and Phylicia Rashad were just co-stars, two actors who happened to share the screen during one of television's most iconic runs. But behind the cameras, their connection was something much deeper. Rashad once admitted, Malcolm wasn't just another young actor to me. He was my son in every sense except blood. That bond wasn't for show. It was real, lived, and lasting. Over the years, Phylicia became a mentor, a guide, and at times even a shield for Malcolm. Industry insiders recall how she would pull him aside on set, whispering advice about everything from handling fame to protecting his spirit in a business that devours young talent. One director who worked closely with them remembered, "If you saw Phylicia with Malcolm, you understood instantly. This wasn't just acting. This was family." That sense of family wasn't only comforting, it was telling. Because decades later, when Malcolm began to drift into silence, withdrawing from the spotlight, it was Phylicia who noticed first. Friends would say he looked tired, or that he was just busy with music, but Rashad felt something heavier pressing on him. She confessed in one interview, "I could see it in his eyes." The laughter was there, but the light behind it was fading. It's that kind of statement that makes people stop and wonder, what was she really seeing? Was it exhaustion from a lifetime in the public eye? Or was it something darker, something no one else dared to talk about? Her words carry weight because she was the one person who had stood beside him since his teenage years. If anyone could sense a storm brewing beneath Malcolm's calm exterior, it was Phylicia Rashad. And as whispers began to circulate about his health, his sudden cancellations, and those cryptic late-night posts that left fans uneasy, it wasn't the press or the public who raised the first alarm. It was the woman he once called his second mother. At first, the shifts were small. Hardly anyone noticed. A canceled appearance here, a vague excuse there. To the casual fan, it meant nothing. But to those who had known Malcolm for years, the changes were undeniable. He wasn't the same energetic young man who once lit up stages and sets without effort. One close collaborator recalled, Malcolm started pulling back from things he used to love. He'd skip events, avoid interviews, and when you did see him, there was this heaviness about him, like he was carrying something none of us could name. His social media posts, once full of uplifting messages about music and creativity, began to take on a more cryptic tone. Late-night reflections about time slipping away and the cost of silence appeared between cheerful updates, leaving fans unsure whether to read them as wisdom or warning. One fan commented under a now-deleted post, "It feels like he's trying to tell us something without really saying it." And then came the whispers. Quiet talk of canceled concerts, unexplained absences from rehearsals, and a growing tension behind the scenes. People began to ask, was it exhaustion? A private health struggle? Or the weight of carrying an image for so many years that no longer matched who he really was? For Phylicia Rashad, those weren't whispers at all, they were alarms. She later revealed, "There were moments when he would look right at me, and I could see the sadness hiding underneath. He'd smile for everyone else, but not for me. I knew what that meant." What exactly did she mean by that? And why did she believe she was the only one who truly recognized the depth of his struggle? These early cracks in Malcolm's carefully built image weren't just signs of stress. They were the opening lines of a story far more complex and far more tragic than anyone was prepared to believe. For years, Malcolm-Jamal Warner carried himself with the calm grace of someone who had survived child stardom without scandal. To the outside world, he was proof that success could be clean, that fame didn't have to destroy you. But behind that polished image, another truth was unfolding. Industry insiders began whispering about long absences and unexplained breaks in his schedule. A fellow musician once hinted, there were days when Malcolm just disappeared. No calls, no messages, just gone. When he came back, he'd brush it off, but you could tell something was eating at him. Fans speculated endlessly. Some believed it was exhaustion. Others suspected he was battling an illness he didn't want to reveal. And then there were darker rumors, whispers of depression, of private struggles that never made it to the headlines. His silence only fueled the speculation. What makes this even more haunting is Phylicia Rashad's later confession. She said, Malcolm was fighting battles no one could see. He was too proud to admit when he needed help, and too strong to let anyone think he was weak. That kind of silence is the most dangerous kind. The weight of fame can be crushing. Imagine being frozen in time as the world's teenage son, while decades pass and expectations never fade. Malcolm himself once remarked in an interview, "People still look at me and see Theo. They don't realize I've lived a whole lifetime since then." It was a statement meant to be lighthearted, but in hindsight, it sounded like a quiet cry for recognition beyond the character that defined him. Behind the music, behind the occasional acting roles, behind the carefully composed public image, something darker was pressing in. And the closer you looked, the clearer it became. Malcolm wasn't just stepping away from the spotlight. He was retreating into a silence that few dared to question, until it was too late. The silence could only hold for so long. By the time Malcolm's inner battles started to bleed into his career, those closest to him knew something was unraveling. He began canceling public appearances at the last minute, leaving fans confused and organizers scrambling. One promoter described the shock, saying, "We got the call just hours before the event. No explanation. It was like he was running from something we couldn't see." Behind the curtain, the pressure was mounting. Industry friends whispered that he was withdrawing not just from work, but from people. The once approachable, magnetic Malcolm was now hard to reach, even for those who had shared stages and studios with him for years. A collaborator later revealed, "You text him, and sometimes weeks would go by with no response. When he did answer, it was short-distant. It felt like he was building walls around himself." And through it all, Phylicia Rashad kept sounding the alarm. She described one chilling encounter where she tried to comfort him during a particularly difficult stretch. "He looked at me and said, 'I'm fine, Mama.' But I could hear the crack in his voice. That wasn't fine. That was a man trying to convince himself he could hold everything together." The breaking point was no single event. It was a slow, quiet collapse. The illness he kept hidden, the expectations he carried, and the loneliness of fighting in silence all merged into a storm he could no longer escape. Rumors spread quickly once he stepped out of the spotlight for good. Some claimed he was secretly hospitalized. Others believed he had chosen seclusion to shield himself from an industry that had given him everything yet left him with nothing. And just when fans thought they understood, a new layer of mystery appeared. Conflicting reports, contradictions in timelines, and the absence of any clear statement from Malcolm himself left the truth tangled. What really happened in those final days? Why did the people closest to him remain so guarded about the details? For Phylicia Rashad, the answer wasn't in the rumors or the speculation. It was in the silence he carried, the silence she had tried to break. But by the time the world caught on, that silence had already turned into the most devastating of goodbyes. The days leading up to Malcolm's final moments were shrouded in secrecy, and that secrecy is exactly what fuels the unease that still lingers today. Friends who tried to check and said he seemed distant but determined, as though he were tying up loose ends without actually saying goodbye. One longtime colleague revealed, "We had a meeting set. He canceled at the very last minute. He just said, 'I need time,' and that was the last I ever heard from him." Neighbors later recalled seeing him only briefly, quiet walks at odd hours, headphones on, head down, avoiding interaction. It was a stark contrast to the Malcolm who once greeted fans with warmth and familiarity. And then came the revelation no one was prepared for. According to insiders, Malcolm had been privately battling an illness for months, maybe longer, refusing to share the details even with those closest to him. A friend close to the family confessed he didn't want to be seen as weak. He thought if people knew what he was going through, it would define him. But the most chilling words came from Phylicia Rashad. In her raw reflection, she admitted he was carrying a darkness that he wouldn't put into words. "I begged him to open up, but he just smiled and told me he'd be okay. That was the last time I saw that smile." The official reports offered little clarity, and in their silence, the rumors exploded. Some whispered about a hidden diagnosis. Others insisted it was the crushing weight of fame and years of bottled-up pressure. The lack of answers only deepened the mystery and the heartbreak. For fans, it was a devastating shock. Social media lit up with messages of disbelief, tributes, and anger. "How could someone who gave us so much joy be gone just like that?" One post read, echoing the collective grief of millions. But beneath the grief, there was also guilt. Guilt that so many had laughed with Theo Huxtable without ever noticing the man behind the character was quietly fading away. The shocking final days of Malcolm's life weren't just a tragedy. They were a wake-up call, a reminder of how invisible struggles can hide behind even the brightest smiles, and how silence can speak louder than words. When the news of Malcolm's passing broke, the world didn't just react, it erupted. Within hours, hashtags like #JusticeForMalcolm and #RememberTheo dominated social media feeds, uniting fans, colleagues, and even casual viewers who had grown up watching him. What started as grief quickly turned into a movement, a chorus of voices demanding answers, recognition, and remembrance. Co-stars and collaborators poured their hearts out publicly. One director wrote, "Some actors leave the set and move on. Malcolm left his heart on set every single day." A fellow musician described him as the type of man who celebrated your wins even when he was drowning in his own struggles. These tributes painted a picture far more complex than the polished public persona. Malcolm wasn't just an actor or musician. He was a mentor, a friend, a quiet giant who carried more than anyone realized. But the most powerful response came from Phylicia Rashad. Refusing to let grief consume her, she transformed it into action. She launched the Inside Voice Project, a mental health initiative aimed at breaking the stigma for Black men in the entertainment industry. In her own words, Malcolm fought in silence. "I refuse to let anyone else carry that burden alone." The project quickly gained traction, drawing support from artists, activists, and community leaders. What began as a tribute has since grown into a lifeline, a platform for voices that once felt silenced. Tributes didn't stop at words. Across the country, fans organized memorial gatherings, from candlelit vigils in New York to viewing parties in Chicago, where people rewatched their favorite Cosby Show episodes, sharing personal stories of how Malcolm's work shaped their lives. One fan at a vigil in Los Angeles summed it up perfectly. "He taught us to laugh when life was heavy." Now we carry that lesson forward. Networks began working on a special television program dedicated not to his characters, but to the man behind them. Never-before-seen interviews, behind-the-scenes footage, and personal testimonies promised to reveal the Malcolm the world rarely got to know. The father, the friend, the silent fighter. His legacy now lives far beyond the screen. It's in the conversations sparked by his story, in the movement that demands we look deeper at those who seem fine, and in the reminder that silence is never the answer. For those who grew up with Theo Huxtable, Malcolm's memory is more than nostalgia. It's a symbol of courage, vulnerability, and the power of speaking out before it's too late. And perhaps that's the truest part of his legacy. He reminded us that every smile hides a story, and every story deserves to be heard. Malcolm's story doesn't end with the credits rolling or the lights fading. It lives on as a warning, a reminder of how easily silent battles can go unnoticed until it's too late. The signs were there, the distance, the missed calls, the walls he built around himself. But in a world that moves too fast, those signals slipped by, hidden behind the smile of a man who gave so much to others while giving so little to himself. As one close friend admitted, "I thought he just needed space. I never imagined that space was where he was losing himself." That's the danger of silence. It convinces us everything is fine, even when it's not. And that's where the wake-up call comes in. Malcolm's journey forces us to ask the uncomfortable questions. How many people around us are smiling through pain? How many loved ones are carrying storms we never stop to notice? His story challenges us not just to watch, but to act, to check in, to listen, and to believe someone when their words don't match their eyes. Because if Malcolm's legacy teaches us anything, it's this: silence doesn't always mean peace. Sometimes it's the loudest cry for help. Malcolm's life was filled with brilliance, humor, and creativity, but his departure left a wound that still aches. Fans will forever remember Theo Huxtable, the lovable son who made us laugh, but those closest to him remember the man behind the role, a man who carried too much in silence. Phylicia Rashad's words echo as the lasting truth of his story: Malcolm fought in silence. I don't want anyone else to go through that alone. Through her advocacy, his story becomes more than tragedy. It becomes a movement, a push to break the stigma, to shine a light where silence once ruled. And for us, the viewers, the fans, the friends who never got to say goodbye, Malcolm's story is now in our hands. It's a reminder to speak, to listen, and to never underestimate the weight someone might be carrying behind a smile. When the lights fade and the screen goes dark, Malcolm-Jamal Warner's legacy doesn't end. It lingers, as a voice urging us to notice, to care, and to make sure no one else's silent battles turn into final goodbyes. So the next time you think someone is fine, remember Malcolm. Ask again. Listen harder. Because sometimes just noticing is enough to change everything.